My parents falsely labeled me psychotic and locked me in a basement for my own good, but I secretly documented every horrific detail and made them famous by publicly exposing their darkest secrets. I was 15 when I got caught shoplifting press-on nails from CVS. Luckily, they didn't press charges, but my parents did. Not in court, not to the police. They relinquished their parental rights. It was a lengthy process, and they didn't have much evidence to give, so they made stuff up. Got family members to say I couldn't be trusted around their kids, paid my sister to say I threatened them with a kitchen knife, and that's how I spent my 16th birthday shoving my belongings into black bin bags and crying my eyes out. When I was almost done, my 8-year-old sister Emily ran in. I thought she was going to wrap her tiny self around me like she did when we were little, but she just asked if I could give her one last dollar before I left. My heart broke as I handed it to her, because I knew that after I was gone, my parents would need a new punching bag. "Thanks!" she exclaimed before waving and sprinting out of the room. I started fantasizing about the foster home, told myself I was glad to leave because at least my parents wouldn't be able to bother me anymore. But every time I tried to convince myself that it didn't hurt, it hurt even more. So I resorted to popping a nicotine mint at every chance I had, and forcing myself to disassociate. That, and hiding the ear of my dog Teddy in my pocket, the one I've had since I was 4. The last time everything felt okay, but the place was 10 times worse than I thought. Not because it was worse than my parents, it wasn't, but because my expectations for a fresh start were crushed. The dad was a fat-headed bald man, with a red face and forehead lines that made it clear he was angry all the time. Meanwhile, his wife looked like she was incapable of smiling. It was like the corners of her lips and eyebrows were superglued into looking stern and mean. But still, I walked in with a huge smile on my face, and when the social worker left, I tried to make small talk. "You guys have a beautiful home," I exclaimed, trying to keep the mood upbeat and lighthearted. The woman, whose name I learned was Martha, walked right up to me. I thought she was going to lunge at me for a hug, or at least give me a handshake, but no, she just screamed at me. "I don't know where your forgotten A came from, but there is no yelling in our home." The whole time I had my face scrunched up, just trying to avoid her spit getting into my eyes. I glanced over at her husband, who was just pointing to the wall in front of me. I swear I thought he was pranking me, but that's when he said the words, "wall sit." I just stared at him. Now, long story short, I was forced to hold a wall sit position until my knees gave out from under me as punishment. That night, I met my roommate. Luckily, she had been disowned by her parents too, except it wasn't for shoplifting. She had put rat poison in her mom's food because she saw her as the barrier of why her stepdad couldn't be with her. Like, "Okay, queen, please stay the F away from me." That morning when I went down for breakfast, there wasn't any. I assumed it was because of yesterday's screaming, until the foster parents clarified that they needed to put the child support into their savings, so every day one child of their choosing wouldn't eat so they could save money. Cool. That night I did what I always do in these situations of trapped abuse. I fantasized about being homeless, about what I would do to survive, and all the horrible things that could happen to me. But this time, I was interrupted by a new thought, a better one that was pure genius. I started acting like I had schizophrenia or some sort of psychosis. At first, I'd just pause mid-sentence and look over my shoulder, whispering, "Not now," or "I can't." Then I escalated. During dinner, I'd have full conversations with empty air, getting agitated and arguing with invisible people. I'd cover my ears and rock, begging them to stop screaming. I wrote disturbing messages on notebook pages, disconnected words, drawings of eyes watching me, warnings about them coming. After about 2 months, they started documenting everything. The foster parents called emergency psych evaluations when I barricaded myself in the bathroom, sobbing about demons trying to steal my skin. I researched symptoms during library time, word salad speech, paranoid delusions, command hallucinations, made sure to hit all the diagnostic criteria. Finally, after 4 months of this act, the foster care agency called my parents. They said I was displaying severe psychotic symptoms that went beyond their pay grade. My parents had to come get me. They had no choice. The agency threatened to sue them for knowingly placing a severely mentally ill child without proper disclosure. But the second I got home, my parents showed me my new safe space. The basement, converted into a therapeutic environment, with locks on the outside. "It's for your own protection during episodes," they explain. "No windows, cameras everywhere. Soundproofing, they claim, is to reduce stimulation." But I still had the upper hand, because they didn't know I was perfectly healthy and ready to make them pay. The basement door clicked shut behind me, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place. My parents' footsteps faded upstairs, leaving me in the dim fluorescent lighting of my new prison. The walls were bare concrete, painted institutional white. A twin mattress sat on a metal frame in one corner, with a single pillow and scratchy blanket. There was a small desk with a plastic chair, a portable toilet behind a privacy screen, and cameras mounted in every corner, their red lights blinking steadily. I sat on the bed and pulled out the torn ear of my dog Teddy from my pocket, running my thumb over the worn fabric. This wasn't how I'd imagined my homecoming, but at least I had control now. They thought I was crazy, which meant they'd be careful around me. Careful meant predictable. Predictable meant I could plan. The first few days, I maintained my act perfectly. When they brought down meals, I'd whisper urgently to the walls, occasionally shouting at invisible tormentors. I'd scratch at my arms and rock back and forth, muttering about the voices. My mother would stand at the top of the stairs, watching through the cracked door, her face a mixture of disgust and fear. On day 4, Emily appeared at the top of the stairs during lunch delivery. She peered down at me with those same calculating eyes that had asked for $1 before I left. My father quickly ushered her away, but not before I saw her counting a small stack of bills in her hand. They were still paying her, probably to keep up the lies about the kitchen knife. I started keeping track of their routines. Breakfast at 7:30, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. My father worked from home 3 days a week. My mother left for her job at the bank every morning at 8:15. Emily Emily had school until 3:30, then usually went to her friend's house until dinner. The house would be empty from 8:15 to 11:30 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, when my father had his golf games. During my second week in the basement, I discovered something interesting. The soundproofing wasn't as complete as they thought. If I pressed my ear against the heating vent, I could hear conversations from the kitchen directly above. That's how I learned they were planning to have me committed to a state facility. They'd already started the paperwork, claiming I was a danger to myself and others. I had to accelerate my timeline. That night, I staged my most dramatic episode yet. I screamed about demons crawling through the walls, threw myself against the door, and when my father came down to check, I lunged at him, babbling incoherently about him being possessed. He stumbled backward, genuinely terrified, and fled back upstairs. I heard him on the phone immediately after, probably calling the psychiatric facility. The next morning, instead of breakfast, 2 paramedics came down with my parents hovering behind them. I let myself go completely limp, muttering about the shadows following me. They strapped me to a gurney and carried me up the stairs. As we passed through the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of Emily at the table, counting another stack of money. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw something flicker there. Not guilt exactly, but maybe uncertainty. The psychiatric hospital was exactly what I expected. Sterile hallways, locked doors, and staff who looked at me like I was already a lost cause. During intake, I ramped up my performance, flinching at invisible touches and begging the nurse to make them stop watching me. They sedated me pretty quickly after that, but psychiatric hospitals have routines too, and routines have gaps. I learned that the night shift was understaffed, that certain nurses would skip room checks if patients were quiet, and most importantly, that they had to release you after 72 hours unless they could prove you were in immediate danger. I spent those 3 days being the model of psychiatric deterioration. I took my medications obediently, palming them when possible, participated in group therapy by sharing elaborate delusions, and made sure to have at least one dramatic episode each day, but never violent, never threatening, just scared and confused and clearly suffering from hallucinations. On the morning of the 3rd day, the psychiatrist met with my parents. I could hear them through the thin walls of the consultation room next to where I waited. My mother was insisting I needed long-term institutionalization, but the doctor was hesitant. Without a clear threat to herself or others, we can't hold her indefinitely. The episodes seemed to be stress-induced, perhaps a more stable home environment. My father's voice cut in, angry. "You don't understand what we've been through with her. The lies, the manipulation, the theft. The shoplifting incident was 2 years ago," the doctor said calmly, and according to her file, it was a first offense for minor items. Has there been any other criminal behavior? Silence. Because of course there hadn't been. They'd made it all up. I was released that afternoon with a prescription for antipsychotics and a recommendation for outpatient therapy. My parents had no choice but to take me home. The car ride was silent except for my occasional whispers to invisible companions. Back in the basement, I noticed changes. They'd installed a small refrigerator and microwave, presumably so they wouldn't have to interact with me as often. There was also a stack of adult coloring books and crayons on the desk, like I was a child. I almost laughed but caught myself, maintaining my vacant stare. That night, I heard them arguing upstairs. My mother wanted to try another facility, but my father was worried about the cost. Emily's voice piped up, asking if she'd still get her helper money if I wasn't there. The argument stopped abruptly after that. I spent the next 2 weeks establishing a new pattern. Quiet during the day, with only minor episodes. Take my medications publicly, still palming them. Show signs of improvement when they checked on me. But at night, I'd have terrible episodes that would wake the whole house. Sleep deprivation makes people sloppy, and my parents were getting very sloppy. It was during one of their exhausted morning routines that my father forgot to lock the basement door properly. The deadbolt was turned, but it hadn't fully engaged. I waited until I heard both cars leave, then carefully pushed against the door. It held for a moment, then popped open. I crept upstairs, my heart pounding. The house looked exactly the same, like I'd never left. Family photos still lined the hallway, including ones of me, as if we were some happy family. I made my way to my parents' room and found what I was looking for. The folder labeled Emily Statements. Inside were pages of coaching notes, what to say, how to act, which details to emphasize, and at the bottom of each page, a payment record. $50 here, $20 there, $100 for the kitchen knife story. 2 years of payments, all carefully documented in my mother's neat handwriting. I photographed everything with the old digital camera I found in the desk drawer, then put it all back exactly as I'd found it. But before heading back to the basement, I stopped in Emily's room. Her piggy bank sat on her dresser, stuffed with bills. I left it untouched but placed a single note on her pillow. I know about the money. I was back in the basement with the door pulled shut before anyone came home. That afternoon, Emily came down with my lunch. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at me with wide eyes. "You're not really crazy, are you?" she whispered. I tilted my head and smiled at nothing, whispering to my invisible friends. She fled back upstairs, but I could hear her crying in her room that night. The next day, everything changed. Emily refused to come downstairs, refused to perpetuate the lies when my parents prompted her. They threatened to take away her money, but she just screamed that she didn't want it anymore. My parents were rattled. Their star witness was crumbling. I used their distraction to my advantage. During one of my father's work-from-home days, I had an episode so severe he called 911. But this time, when the paramedics arrived, I was suddenly lucid, confused, scared. I told them I didn't remember anything, that I'd just woken up on the floor with my father standing over me, screaming. The paramedics were suspicious. They asked to speak with me privately, and I broke down crying, telling them about the basement, the locks, the cameras, how scared I was, how I just wanted to leave but they wouldn't let me. I showed them the bruises on my wrists from throwing myself against the door, carefully self-inflicted for this exact moment. They called the police. My parents tried to explain about my condition, but their story was falling apart. Emily, when questioned, just cried and said she didn't know anything about any knife. The police found the basement setup deeply concerning. A locked room with cameras for a minor child, even one with mental health issues, raised red flags. Child Protective Services got involved. During their investigation, I maintained perfect stability. No episodes, no whispers, no fear of invisible threats. I took psychological evaluations and passed them all. The psychiatrist from the hospital testified that my symptoms had seemed inconsistent with typical psychosis. Emily finally told the truth about the payments, the lies, everything. My parents tried to claim I'd manipulated everyone, that this was all part of my master plan, which, ironically, was the truth. But who would believe them? They were the adults who'd locked their child in a basement, who'd paid their younger daughter to lie, who'd tried to have me institutionalized based on fabricated evidence. The court placed Emily and me with our aunt on my mother's side. She'd always been suspicious of my parents' stories, but hadn't had proof. Now she welcomed us both, though Emily and I had a long road ahead to repair our relationship. The day we left, I stood in my old bedroom one last time, packing my real belongings this time. No black trash bags, no tears. I found my old teddy bear, the one missing an ear, and reunited it with the torn piece I'd carried for so long. Emily stood in the doorway, watching. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "About the money, about everything." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was only 10 now, still just a kid who'd been used by our parents. "I know," I said. "We're going to be okay." As we drove away from that house for the last time, I didn't look back. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. And sometimes, that's enough. The Reddit post ends there, but I still think about that basement sometimes, about how easy it was to turn their weapon against them. They'd wanted to paint me as crazy, dangerous, untrustworthy, so I gave them exactly what they wanted, until it destroyed them. My aunt says I should feel guilty about deceiving everyone, even if it was to escape abuse, but I don't. They taught me that sometimes you have to lie to protect yourself. They just never expected me to be better at it than them. Emily and I are doing better now. She's in therapy, working through the guilt of being their accomplice. I'm in therapy too, though for different reasons. Turns out that pretending to be crazy for months can mess with your head in ways you don't expect. But we're safe, we're together, and we're finally free from parents who saw us as nothing more than inconveniences to be managed and discarded. Sometimes I wonder if they ever really loved us, or if we were just props in their perfect family facade. I guess I'll never know. And honestly, I don't care anymore. They made their choice the day they decided to throw me away over some press-on nails. I just made sure they lived with the consequences. The foster parents, Martha and her husband, tried to contact my aunt once, claiming I'd traumatized their other foster kids with my episodes. My aunt told them to lose our number. Turns out they'd been reported by multiple former foster children for their abusive discipline methods. My complaints just added to their growing file. These days, I'm 17 and focusing on school. I want to study psychology, maybe become a therapist myself someday. There's something powerful about understanding how the mind works, how to recognize manipulation and abuse. I want to help kids who are trapped like I was, who need someone to believe them. Emily's 12 now and doing well in school. She still has nightmares sometimes about testifying against our parents, but she's getting stronger every day. We have movie nights every Friday, just the two of us, trying to build the sibling relationship we never got to have before. Our parents lost custody permanently. Last I heard, they were fighting each other in divorce court, each blaming the other for how things turned out. It's fitting, really. They spent so much time creating elaborate lies about me that they forgot to maintain their own facade. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if there was another way out. Could I have reported them earlier, found help through proper channels? Maybe. But when you're 15 and everyone believes your parents over you, when they've spent years building a case against you, sometimes you have to get creative. I'm not proud of lying to medical professionals, of taking resources from people who genuinely needed psychiatric help, but I'm not ashamed either. I did what I had to do to survive, to protect myself, and ultimately my sister too. The truth is, the system failed me long before I ever shoplifted those press-on nails. Teachers who saw the bruises and said nothing. Family members who believed the lies without question. Social workers who took my parents' word over mine. I just learned to use that same system against them. Now I volunteer at a youth shelter on weekends, sharing my story with kids who feel trapped. I tell them about the importance of documentation, of finding trustworthy adults, of knowing their rights. But I also tell them that sometimes, when all else fails, you have to save yourself by any means necessary. My therapist says I have trust issues, which makes me laugh. Of course I do. But I'm working on it, slowly learning that not everyone is out to use me or throw me away. My aunt has been patient, never pushing for more than I'm ready to give. The nightmares have mostly stopped now. I no longer wake up thinking I'm back in that basement, watching the red lights of the cameras blink in the darkness. Instead, I dream about the future, about the life I'm building free from their control. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I hold that old teddy bear with its carefully sewn ear and remember the girl who carried that torn piece in her pocket like a talisman. She was scared and alone and desperate, but she was also smart and resilient and refused to let them win. That girl saved me. And now, finally, I'm learning to save myself in healthier ways. One day, one truth, one real connection at a time. The story went viral, as these things do. Thousands of comments from people who'd experienced similar situations, who'd been failed by parents and systems meant to protect them. Some called me manipulative, said I was no better than my parents. Others called me a survivor, a genius, a hero. I'm none of those things. I'm just a 17-year-old girl who refused to disappear quietly when her parents decided she was disposable, who used their own weapons against them, who saved herself and her sister the only way she knew how. And if that makes me the villain in their story, well, I've been called worse. At least now I'm free to write my own ending. The comments kept pouring in, but I couldn't focus on them. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Nice story. Too bad it's not over yet. My blood ran cold. The area code was from my hometown. I showed the message to my aunt, who immediately called the police. They said it could be anyone, that viral stories attract all kinds of attention. But I knew better. My parents had always been resourceful when cornered. The next morning, Emily didn't come down for breakfast. I found her in her room, staring at her laptop screen. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. On the screen was an email from our mother. We know where you are. We know what school you go to. We have rights as your biological parents. Come home voluntarily, or we'll make things very difficult for your aunt. I sat beside Emily, wrapping my arm around her trembling shoulders. She leaned into me, something she hadn't done since before I'd left for foster care. They can't take us back, can they? She whispered. No, I said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at my stomach. The court removed their custody. They have no rights anymore. But I underestimated their determination. That afternoon, while I was at school, a woman approached Emily during recess. She introduced herself as a family reunification specialist and said she needed to ask Emily some questions about her current living situation. Emily, trained by years of manipulation, knew something was wrong. She ran to her teacher, who called our aunt immediately. The woman disappeared before anyone could question her, but the security footage showed someone who looked suspiciously like my mother's sister, the same aunt who testified that I couldn't be trusted around her kids. Our aunt installed a security system that night, cameras at every entrance, panic buttons in our rooms, and new locks on all the windows. She took time off work to drive us to and from school, but the harassment escalated. Anonymous calls to Child Protective Services claimed our aunt was neglecting us. Each investigation found nothing, but they were disruptive and stressful. Emily started having panic attacks. I found myself checking locks obsessively, jumping at every unexpected sound. Then came the letters. Not threatening exactly, but unsettling. Photos of us taken from a distance, walking to school, at the grocery store, in our aunt's backyard. Each one had a single line written on the back. We're watching. Family is forever. You can't hide. Our aunt wanted to go back to court for a restraining order, but our lawyer advised against it. The letters were carefully crafted to skirt the line of harassment without crossing it. There was no explicit threat, no proof they came from our parents. Going to court might actually give them the opportunity to challenge the custody arrangement they claimed was obtained through fraud. I started carrying pepper spray. Emily refused to go anywhere alone. Our aunt hired a private investigator to document any contact from our parents, building a case for when they inevitably escalated, because I knew they would. They'd lost control, and that was something they couldn't tolerate. The breaking point came 3 weeks later. I was walking home from my volunteer shift at the youth shelter when a car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and there was my father. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, desperate. Get in the car, he said, not asking, demanding. I kept walking, my hand on my pepper spray. He drove slowly beside me, matching my pace. You destroyed our family, he said. Your mother hasn't slept in weeks. She just sits in your old room crying. Is that what you wanted? I didn't respond, but my hands were shaking. Part of me, the part that was still a hurt child, wanted to apologize, to fix things, but I knew that was exactly what he was counting on. We're moving, he continued. Somewhere fresh, where no one knows about your lies. You and Emily can come with us. We'll start over. Be a real family again. We have a real family now, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. His face contorted with rage. The car swerved slightly, and for a moment I thought he might try to grab me, but then he saw the security camera on the corner store we were passing. He drove off without another word, but not before I memorized his license plate. It was a rental. That night, our aunt sat us down for a difficult conversation. Our parents had hired a new lawyer, one who specialized in parental alienation cases. They were building a narrative that I had manipulated the system, turned Emily against them, and fooled everyone with my psychotic act. They wanted their parental rights reinstated, but they can't do that, Emily said, her voice small. Can they? Our aunt's silence was answer enough. The legal system was complicated, and our parents were exploiting every loophole they could find. I made a decision that night. If they wanted to play dirty, I could play dirtier. I still had the photos of the payment records from Emily's testimony, but more importantly, I had something they didn't know about: recordings. During my time in the basement, I'd use the old digital camera's video function to record their conversations through the heating vent. Hours of them discussing how to have me committed, laughing about the lies they'd told, planning new ways to punish me for embarrassing them. I'd hidden the memory card in the lining of my teddy bear, a backup plan I'd hoped never to need. I gave everything to our lawyer: the photos, the recordings, the documentation of their harassment. He said it was more than enough to bury any attempt at regaining custody, but warned that using it would mean a very public, very ugly battle. They're counting on you not wanting that exposure, he said. They think you'll back down to protect Emily from the spotlight. He was right. The thought of putting Emily through a court battle made me sick. But then I looked at her, saw the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched at unexpected noises. They were already hurting her. At least this way, we could end it. We filed for a permanent restraining order, including all our evidence. Our parents' lawyer tried to argue the recordings were obtained illegally, but the judge was more concerned with their content. The local newspaper picked up the story. Parents who abandoned teen over shoplifting attempt to regain custody, made for compelling headlines. Our parents' carefully constructed image crumbled. My father's employer launched an investigation into his character. My mother was asked to resign from the PTA. Their church congregation, who'd been told I was a troubled teen they'd tried so hard to help, learned the truth. But cornered animals are dangerous, and my parents were very cornered. It started with cyberbullying, fake social media accounts spreading lies about me and Emily, claims that I was actually mentally ill, that I'd manipulated evidence, that Emily was being brainwashed. Some people believed it. I lost friends. Emily was excluded from birthday parties. Our aunt received death threats from strangers who decided we were the villains. Then came the attempted break-in. We were at a school event when our neighbor called. Someone had tried to jimmy the back door lock. The security cameras showed a figure in dark clothing, face covered, but the build looked familiar. The police couldn't prove anything. Emily stopped sleeping. She'd crawl into my bed at night, clutching her own stuffed animal, whispering about nightmares where our parents took her away. I'd hold her, promising I wouldn't let that happen, while fighting my own terror that I couldn't keep that promise. Our aunt hired security for a few weeks, but we couldn't afford it long term. We varied our routines, never taking the same route twice. I taught Emily self-defense moves I'd learned at the shelter. We lived in constant fear, waiting for the next escalation. It came in the form of a job offer. Our aunt worked at a small marketing firm, and suddenly her boss was pressuring her to relocate to another state for a promotion. When she declined, her hours were cut. Projects were reassigned. It became clear someone was pulling strings. I did some digging and discovered our father had connections to one of the firm's major clients. The message was clear: leave town voluntarily or be forced out financially. But we'd underestimated Emily. Quiet, traumatized Emily who'd taken money to lie about me. She'd been documenting everything in her own way. Every interaction with our parents, every payment, every threat they'd made to keep her in line. She'd hidden it all in a password-protected blog she'd never published. I started it as evidence, she told me one night, in case something happened to you in foster care. I thought if you died, I'd need proof of what they did. The blog was damning, not just about me, but about years of manipulation, emotional abuse, and neglect we'd both endured. Things I hadn't even known about. Times they'd punished her for defending me. Threats they'd made if she ever told anyone about the payments. We gave it all to our lawyer, who immediately filed additional charges. Criminal charges this time. Witness tampering, child endangerment, harassment. The prosecutor, who'd been hesitant before, now had enough evidence to move forward. Our parents made one last desperate attempt. They showed up at Emily's school, claiming there was a family emergency. But Emily's teacher, briefed on the situation, immediately called the police. They were arrested in the parking lot, violating the restraining order in front of dozens of witnesses. The trial was brutal. Our parents' lawyer painted me as a master manipulator who'd turned a normal punishment for shoplifting into an elaborate revenge scheme. They brought in character witnesses who'd known our family for years, all testifying what good parents they'd seemed to be. But then Emily took the stand. 12 years old, voice shaking but determined, she told the truth. All of it. The payments, the threats, the years of being used as a weapon against me. She looked directly at our parents as she spoke, and I saw something break in my mother's face. They told me you were dangerous, Emily said to me, though she was speaking to the court. They said if I didn't help them, you'd hurt me like you wanted to hurt them. But you never hurt anyone. You just wanted to be loved. The courtroom was silent. Even our parents' lawyer seemed at a loss. I testified last, walking through the timeline with evidence to support every claim. The photos, the recordings, the documentation. But the most powerful moment was when I pulled out my teddy bear, showing the carefully sewn ear. This is all I had left of the sister who used to play with me, I said, looking at Emily. Before they turned her against me, before they threw me away, I carried it everywhere, hoping someday I'd get her back. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Our parents were sentenced to probation and mandatory counseling, with the condition that they have no contact with us until we turned 18, and only then if we initiated it. As they were let out, my mother turned to look at us. For just a moment, I saw something like regret in her eyes. But then my father whispered something to her, and her face hardened again. They left without a word. Outside the courthouse, reporters wanted statements. Our aunt shielded us, but Emily stepped forward. "We just want to be kids," she said simply. "That's all we ever wanted." The drive home was quiet. Emily held my hand the whole way, her grip tight but no longer trembling. Our aunt ordered pizza, and we ate it on the living room floor, watching a movie like a normal family. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe we could actually be one. That night, Emily knocked on my door. She was carrying something behind her back, looking nervous. "I saved up," she said, producing a new teddy bear. This one was wearing a little shirt that said, "Big Sister," to replace the one they ruined. Well, not replace, but you know. I hugged her tight, both of us crying. Not the desperate tears of fear and trauma, but something cleaner, something healing. "I love you," she whispered. "I'm sorry I ever let them make me forget that." "I love you too," I said, "and you don't have to apologize. We were both just trying to survive." We stayed up talking until dawn, really talking for the first time in years. About the good memories from before things went bad, about our fears and hopes, about the future we could now actually plan for. The harassment stopped after the trial. Our parents' allies, faced with the evidence presented in court, distanced themselves. The fake social media accounts went silent. Our aunt's job mysteriously improved, her boss apologizing for the miscommunication about the transfer. Emily started therapy, working through years of guilt and manipulation. Her nightmares decreased, replaced by dreams of college, of becoming a writer, of telling stories that helped other kids like us. She started a blog, a real one this time, about surviving family trauma. I continued volunteering at the shelter, but now I could be honest about my story. The kids listened with wide eyes as I told them about the basement, the act, the way I'd turned my parents' weapons against them. Some judged me. Others saw hope that they too could escape. One girl, 15 like I'd been, pulled me aside after a session. Her parents were trying to have her declared mentally incompetent to gain access to a trust fund from her grandmother. The parallels were eerie. "Document everything," I told her. "Every conversation, every threat, every lie. The truth is your best weapon, but sometimes you have to be strategic about how you reveal it." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. I gave her my number, told her to call if she needed anything. 2 months later, she texted me from her older sister's house. She'd gathered enough evidence to get herself removed from her parents' care. She was safe. That's when I knew what I wanted to do with my life. Not just therapy, but advocacy. Legal advocacy for kids trapped in abusive situations. lessons. I started taking pre-law classes alongside psychology, determined to be the adult I'd needed when I was 15 and desperate. Emily and I grew closer than we'd ever been. We had inside jokes, shared hobbies, a relationship built on truth instead of manipulation. Sometimes we'd talk about our parents, wondering if they'd ever really understand what they'd lost. But mostly we focused on what we'd gained: each other, our aunt, our freedom. The Reddit post had long since faded from viral memory, but occasionally I'd get messages from other survivors, some sharing their own stories, others asking for advice. I answered everyone, remembering how alone I'd felt in that basement, planning my desperate escape. One message stood out. It was from a former foster kid who'd lived with Martha and her husband after me. She'd read my story and wanted me to know that my reports had helped build the case that finally got their license revoked. No more kids would suffer their discipline. "You saved us," she wrote, "even while saving yourself." I printed that message and kept it in my desk drawer. On bad days, when the trauma felt too heavy or the future too uncertain, I'd read it. A reminder that sometimes surviving isn't just about yourself. Sometimes it creates ripples that help others survive too. Senior year arrived faster than expected. College applications, scholarship essays, all asking me to describe challenges I'd overcome. I wrote about resilience, about the complexity of family, about the lengths we go to for love and survival. I didn't sugarcoat it, didn't pretend it was inspirational. It was just true. Emily helped me edit the essays, her insight sharp and honest. "You sound like you're apologizing," she said about one draft. "Stop that. You saved us both." She was right. I'd spent so long feeling guilty about the deception, about using the system's flaws against itself, that I'd forgotten the alternative. We could have stayed trapped, Emily growing up as their accomplice and me eventually broken by their abuse. Instead, we were free. The acceptance letters came in spring, full scholarships to several schools, all impressed by my story and my grades. Turns out that obsessive studying in the basement had paid off. I chose a university close enough to visit Emily regularly, but far enough to build my own life. Emily threw me a going-away party. Just us, our aunt, and a few close friends who'd stood by us through everything. She made a speech that had everyone crying, talking about the sister who'd protected her even when she hadn't deserved it. "You taught me that love isn't about blood or obligation," she said. "It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Our aunt drove me to college, the car loaded with everything I owned. Not much, but all of it chosen by me, paid for with money I'd earned. No more black trash bags, no more running. As we pulled up to my dorm, my phone buzzed. An unknown number again, but this time I recognized the area code. It was from the town where our parents had moved after the trial. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It was from my mother. Just one line: "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Maybe someday I'd be ready to hear those words, to consider what they meant, but not today. Today was about moving forward. Emily hugged me goodbye at the dorm entrance, promising to video call every week. Our aunt slipped me some cash for emergencies and made me promise to come home for monthly dinners. I watched them drive away, feeling scared and excited and free. My roommate arrived later that afternoon, chattering nervously about classes and parties and all the normal college concerns. She asked about my family, and for the first time, I had an easy answer. "I have a sister and an aunt who love me," I said. "That's all the family I need." That night, I unpacked my things in my half of the tiny dorm room. The last item was my old teddy bear, now carefully repaired, sitting next to the new one Emily had given me. I placed them both on my desk, guardians of this new chapter. I thought about the girl who'd hidden that torn ear in her pocket, convinced she'd never be loved again. The girl who'd spent months pretending to be crazy just to escape. The girl who'd risked everything on a desperate plan. She'd be proud of who I'd become. Not perfect, still healing, but surviving. More than surviving, thriving. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Miss you already, but I'm proud of you. We both are." I smiled, typing back, "Miss you too. Take care of our aunt. I'll see you soon." And I would, because that's what real family does. They come back, they stay connected, they choose each other, again and again, no matter what. The story I'd posted on Reddit had ended with me calling myself a villain in my parents' narrative. But I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the hero either. I was just a girl who'd refused to disappear, who'd fought for herself and her sister with the only weapons available. And now, finally, I could stop fighting and start living. The first few weeks of college passed in a blur of orientation activities and awkward introductions. I threw myself into the normalcy of it all, desperate to be just another freshman worried about meal plans and midterms. My roommate, Alexandra, turned out to be exactly the kind of person I needed. Chatty enough to fill silences, but perceptive enough to know when to stop asking questions. Everything felt almost peaceful until the package arrived. It came to my dorm on a Tuesday afternoon. No return address. Inside was a single photo, me walking to my psychology class, taken from across the quad. On the back, in my father's handwriting, "Distance doesn't change blood." My hands shook as I called our aunt. She contacted campus security immediately, but without a direct threat, their options were limited. They increased patrols near my dorm and classes, noted the incident in their files. Standard procedure that felt woefully inadequate. I changed my route to classes, started varying my schedule. Alexandra noticed but didn't pry, just started walking with me more often. But the packages kept coming. Photos of me at the library, the dining hall, even through my dorm window, each with a message: "We're still your parents. You can't hide forever. Family finds a way." The breaking point came during midterms. I'd been studying in the library when I felt eyes on me. Across the reading room sat a man I didn't recognize, but something about his posture, the way he held his newspaper without reading it, set off every alarm in my head. When I packed up to leave, he folded his paper and followed. I ducked into the bathroom and called campus security from a stall. They arrived quickly, but the man was gone. The security footage showed him clearly, a private investigator my parents had hired. Perfectly legal, they said. He hadn't approached me, hadn't made threats, just watching, documenting. That night, I called Emily. She was trying to sound brave, but I could hear the strain in her voice. Our parents had been driving past our aunt's house slowly, legally, parking across the street for hours, legally, having food delivered to the house with notes attached, legally, everything carefully calculated to skirt the restraining order. Our aunt had installed more cameras, changed the locks again, even considered moving. But our parents had made it clear, wherever we went, they'd follow. They had resources we didn't, time we didn't, and most terrifyingly, they had patience. I made a decision that night. If they wanted to play the long game, I'd give them something more immediate to focus on. I called our lawyer and told him I wanted to pursue the criminal charges more aggressively. Not just harassment, but stalking, witness intimidation, child abuse, everything we'd documented, everything Emily had recorded in her hidden blog. He warned me it would be brutal, that they'd hire better lawyers, drag out proceedings, make our lives miserable through legal channels, but I was done running, done reacting. It was time to go on the offensive. The next morning, I did something that probably wasn't smart but felt necessary. I had Alexandra take a photo of me holding that day's newspaper in front of my dorm. I sent it to the email address the private investigator had been using to send reports. Our lawyer had subpoenaed them during the restraining order hearing. My message was simple. I know you're watching. I'm not hiding anymore. Within hours, my phone exploded with calls from unknown numbers. I didn't answer, but the voicemails they left were revealing. My mother, sobbing about how I was destroying the family. My father, cold and threatening legal action for harassment. Their lawyer, warning me about the consequences of escalating the situation. But I'd learned something important during my time pretending to be crazy. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent think you're unpredictable. So I did the opposite of what they expected. I went completely public. I wrote a detailed blog post about everything. The shoplifting, the abandonment, the foster care, the basement, the fake psychosis, the trial, and now the stalking. I included redacted versions of documents, photos of the packages they'd sent, screenshots of the investigators' reports. Then I shared it everywhere. Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, even LinkedIn. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of shares, messages of support, offers of help. But more importantly, my parents' carefully maintained public image shattered completely. My father's employer, already suspicious after the trial, launched a full investigation. My mother's social clubs quietly revoked her memberships. The private investigator dropped them as clients, not wanting the negative publicity. But cornered animals lash out, and my parents were very cornered. The escalation came through Emily. She called me crying one night. Our parents had somehow gotten her new cell number and were bombarding her with texts. Not threats exactly, but manipulative messages about how much they missed her, how sorry they were, how they just wanted their family back. Each message carefully crafted to avoid violating the restraining order while maximum emotional damage. Our aunt changed Emily's number again, but they found that one too. Then they started showing up at places Emily might be. The mall, the movie theater, always just far enough away to be legal. Always with that same message. We just want our family back. Emily started having panic attacks again. Her grades dropped. She stopped wanting to leave the house. I watched my little sister shrinking back into herself, and something in me snapped. I called my parents' lawyer directly, told him I had recordings from the basement that I hadn't shared yet, conversations where they discussed using Emily against me, where they laughed about manipulating her, where they planned exactly how to break me. All recorded through that heating vent, all perfectly clear. Your clients have two choices, I said. They can stop all contact attempts immediately and permanently, or I release everything, not just to the court, but to every news outlet, every social media platform, every single person in their lives. The lawyer tried to threaten me with legal action for the recordings, but I'd done my homework. In our state, I'd had a reasonable expectation of privacy in my own living space, even if that space was a locked basement. The recordings were admissible. Within 24 hours, the harassment stopped. The packages, the drive-bys, the messages to Emily, everything. Our lawyer received a formal agreement from their lawyer. No contact of any kind until we turned 25, and then only if we initiated it. Any violation would result in immediate release of all recordings. But I knew my parents. They didn't give up. They just changed tactics. The silence was almost worse than the harassment because now we didn't know what they were planning. The answer came through an unexpected source. My mother's sister, the one who testified against me, reached out through our lawyer. She wanted to meet, to apologize, to explain. Against everyone's advice, I agreed. We met in a public place, a busy coffee shop near campus. She looked older, worn down. She told me how my parents had threatened her, said they'd ruin her business if she didn't testify, how they'd convinced her I was dangerous, shown her fabricated evidence, how she'd believed them because they were so convincing, so normal seeming. Then she told me why she was really there. My parents were planning to have another child. They'd been seeing fertility specialists, telling everyone how their first attempts at parenting had been sabotaged by a mentally ill child who'd turned their other daughter against them. They were painting themselves as victims who deserved another chance. The thought of another child in their care made me physically sick. But what could I do? They hadn't committed any crimes that would prevent them from having more children. The restraining order only applied to Emily and me. That's when my aunt's sister pulled out a folder. I've been documenting things too, she said. Comments they've made, lies they've told, people they've manipulated. I'm not the only family member who started to see the truth. Inside were statements from cousins, uncles, family friends, people who'd noticed inconsistencies in my parents' stories, who'd felt uncomfortable with their behavior, who'd stayed quiet out of politeness or fear. But my viral blog post had given them permission to speak up. We took everything to our lawyer, who saw an opportunity. While we couldn't prevent my parents from having another child, we could make sure any adoption agency or fertility clinic knew their history. It was all public record now. The trial transcripts, the restraining orders, the documented abuse. My parents' fertility doctor quietly dropped them as patients after receiving an anonymous package of court documents. documents. The adoption agency they'd approached rejected their application. Word spread in their community. The narrative they'd tried to control slipped completely out of their hands, but they had one more card to play, and it was devastating. Emily called me sobbing on a Friday night. Our parents had sent a letter to our aunt's house. Not to Emily, but to our aunt. In it, they detailed every financial struggle our aunt had ever had, every mistake, every moment of weakness, things only family would know. They threatened to petition for custody based on our aunt's financial instability and questionable judgment in taking us in. Our aunt was terrified. She'd sacrificed so much for us, and now they were threatening to use that sacrifice against her. The worst part was, they might have a case. Our aunt had struggled financially since taking us in. She'd missed work for court dates, therapy appointments, school meetings. Her credit had taken hits from the security systems, the lawyer fees, the therapy costs. I stared at that letter, at my parents' careful handwriting, and realized something. They'd never stop. Not really. They'd always be there, waiting for us to stumble, ready to pounce, unless I ended it definitively. I made a call I never thought I'd make, to a journalist who'd reached out after my blog went viral, wanting to do a feature story. I'd turned her down before, but now I gave her everything. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. But more than that, I gave her the human story, Emily's nightmares, our aunt's sacrifices, the community they'd fooled for years. The article ran in a major publication, picked up by others within days. It wasn't just our story anymore. It became a conversation about parental rights versus children's safety, about how abusers use the system, about the gaps that let children fall through. My parents tried to sue for defamation, but truth is an absolute defense. They tried to claim invasion of privacy, but they'd made it public first with their custody attempts. Their lawyer dropped them. Their new community, already suspicious, completely ostracized them. The final blow came from an unexpected source. The IRS, alerted by the detailed financial records in the article showing payments to Emily and others for false testimony, opened an investigation. Turns out, they hadn't reported those payments properly. Tax fraud charges followed. I watched from my dorm room as my parents' remaining world crumbled. Part of me felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just empty. They'd brought it on themselves, but they were still my parents. Some part of me would always be that 15-year-old girl who just wanted them to love her. Emily handled it differently. She threw herself into her blog, turning it into a resource for other kids in similar situations. She started speaking at schools about recognizing manipulation and abuse. At 13, she was already stronger than I'd ever been. Our aunt finally got some peace. The community rallied around her, setting up a fund to help with the financial burden she'd taken on. Her employer, moved by the article, gave her a raise and flexible hours. She started sleeping through the night again. As for me, I focused on school, psychology and pre-law, determined to be the advocate kids like us needed. My professors, aware of my story, became mentors. Classmates who'd experienced their own trauma sought me out, and we formed an informal support network. But the real test came during winter break. Going home meant returning to the town where it all started, where people still whispered about our family, where memories lurked on every corner. I almost didn't go, but Emily needed me, and I'd promised to never abandon her like our parents had abandoned me. The first night back, Emily crawled into my bed like she used to during the trial, but this time, she wasn't seeking comfort. She was offering it. "I've been thinking," she said, "about forgiveness. Not for them, but for us, so we can stop carrying this." I thought about all the anger I'd held, all the plans for revenge, all the energy I'd spent fighting them. She was right. They'd taken enough from us. It was time to stop giving them power over our lives. That week, we did something symbolic. We took all the photos of our parents, all the documents we'd kept just in case, all the reminders of the battle we'd fought, and we had a bonfire in our aunt's backyard. Not out of anger, but out of release. As I watched the papers burn, I felt something shift. The hypervigilance that had kept me alive started to ease. The constant planning for their next move quieted. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe I could just be a normal college student worried about normal things. Emily must have felt it too because she started laughing. Not the bitter laugh of someone who'd been through too much, but the genuine laugh of a teenager who'd remembered how to be young. Our aunt joined us, bringing hot chocolate and marshmallows. We turned it into an impromptu celebration, not of victory over our parents, but of survival, of chosen family, of futures that were finally ours to write. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Alexandra asking about spring semester plans. Such a normal question from a normal friend about a normal future. I smiled, realizing that this was what winning really looked like. Not the dramatic downfall of my parents, but this quiet moment of possibility. I texted back about classes I wanted to take, campus events we should attend, all the wonderfully mundane details of a life no longer defined by trauma. My parents had lost more than custody or reputation. They'd lost relevance in our lives. As I packed to return to school, Emily handed me something. A new photo, us at the bonfire, laughing, our aunt smiling behind us. "For your dorm," she said, "so you remember what really matters." I hugged her tight, this sister who'd found her way back to me, who'd chosen truth over money, who'd been braver than any 13-year-old should have to be. We'd survived our parents, survived the system, survived our own desperate choices. Now, it was time to live. The drive back to campus felt different, lighter. I still checked my mirrors, old habits dying hard, but I wasn't looking for threats anymore. I was looking forward. My phone buzzed with messages from the support network I'd found at school, friends who understood that family was more than blood, that sometimes the people who should protect you become the ones you need protection from, but also that healing was possible, that broken didn't mean worthless, that surviving could become thriving. As I pulled into the campus parking lot, I realized the girl who'd hidden that teddy bear ear in her pocket was gone. In her place was someone harder but also softer, someone who'd learned that sometimes you have to burn everything down to build something better. I grabbed my bags, including the new photo Emily had given me, and headed to my dorm. Alexandra greeted me with stories about her break, normal family drama that seemed so beautifully simple. I listened, really listened, grateful for the ordinary problems of ordinary people. That night, I placed Emily's photo next to my teddy bears on my desk. 3 guardians now, past, present, and future. The torn ear that reminded me where I'd been, the new bear that showed me I was loved, and the photo that proved we'd made it through. I opened my laptop to start working on scholarship essays, no longer writing about survival, but about purpose. About using my story not as a weapon, but as a bridge for others crossing their own dark waters. My parents had taught me to lie, to manipulate, to survive at any cost, but I was learning to transform those skills into something better. Strategy, advocacy, the ability to see through facades and help others do the same. Outside my window, other students hurried across campus, each carrying their own stories, their own struggles. But for the first time, I felt like I belonged among them. Not as the girl with the crazy parents or the viral story, but just as myself, whoever that turned out to be. The last email in my inbox was from the youth shelter where I volunteered, asking if I could take on more hours, maybe lead a support group for teens aging out of foster care. I wrote back immediately, saying yes. It was time to stop running from my past and start using it to light the way for others. As I settled in to write, Alexandra asked if I wanted to grab late-night pizza with some friends. Such a simple invitation, but it meant everything. I closed my laptop and said yes. There would be time for essays and advocacy tomorrow. Tonight, I was just a college student eating pizza with friends, and that was exactly where I needed to be. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but finally mine to shape. My parents were out there somewhere, living with the consequences of their choices, but they were no longer my story. I was.